While everyone's eagerly awaiting the college football season, I don't think there's a fan base across the country that is ready to explode like Tennessee. Proud tradition, used to winning in the past, but it's been 7 or 8 years since they really won some meaningful football games. Coming off 7-6, impressive bowl victory over Iowa. Let's get some personnel breakdown. We bring in Daniel Lewis from Rocky Top Insider to help us sort through the Vols and all these expectations coming into 2015. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us. I think let's dive into quarterback because it all starts there, and everyone amped about Josh Dobbs coming off 5 games started at the end of 14. 3 really exceptional games, especially the efficient manner in which he dissected Iowa. He had the huge game against South Carolina, 2 clunkers of sorts, but still 4-1 in the 5 starts. My question is, are we taking too much for granted here? It's only 5 stars under his belt. He's done extremely well, but are we counting too much on Josh Dobbs?
Well, hey, Mark, and thanks for having me on today. And that's a really good question to start with. A lot of expectations for Joshua Dobbs. And like you said, he's a guy who's done some really good things and shown some flashes of brilliance, frankly. You know, you referenced the Iowa game. The South Carolina comeback last year was kind of an instant classic for Tennessee. His performance against Kentucky was really impressive last year as well. Showed some flashes in 2013 as well when he had a quick stretch as a starter when Tennessee had some injuries that season as well. But you also hit it on the head. He's unproven at this point. His sample size is relatively small, and while he's shown those flashes, shown that he can do some really good things, when he's taken on some special defenses, taken on some better defense especially, look at a team like Missouri that had a really good defensive line last year. You know, he struggled a little bit against that team. And Tennessee's offensive line, which is, again, a question mark heading into 2015, got manhandled in that game, and it made Joshua Dobbs look a little bit pedestrian. And then you could talk about the Vanderbilt performance as well in Tennessee's regular season finale. It was a closer than it should have been win for Tennessee in that game. Tennessee was missing a couple of its weapons on the perimeter in that game. Josh Dobbs didn't look as impressive then either. So you've seen a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde with him. He's a guy with all the potential and the talent in the world. He can make most of the throws that you need at the SEC level. He's an exceptional athlete. Everyone knows about how smart he is, how he's an aerospace engineer and interned at testing military jets this summer at Pratt & Whitney and does all those things and has the potential for a really, really big year. Have to see consistency from him, though. Have to see that he can do it week in, week out against Tennessee's schedule. I think we'll get a good taste of that. You start with Oklahoma in week 2. A couple weeks later, the gauntlet of Florida, Arkansas, Georgia, Alabama, it starts. How is he going to hold up in that stretch? Is he going to live up to the hype, live up to the expectations? But I think some people have gotten a little ahead of maybe where he is. And the fact that there are not a ton of proven quarterbacks in the SEC, I think, have elevated him, at least in the perception, a little bit as well.
Bingo. That's probably where I come in with my naming of Josh Dobbs as the best quarterback in the SEC. So when I serve out the indictment, I'm pointing fingers back at myself, cut a top 5 video, and I know Dak Prescott was the best quarterback in 2014. I expect Dobbs to unseat him at the top of the SEC chart this year. Let's look at running back. Let's go through the supporting cast. Jalen Hurd coming off a nice season of just about 900 yards, 4.7 per carry, 5 touchdowns. Does a nice job coming out of the backfield with 35 receptions as well. Alvin Kamara, obviously a prized recruit as well, should take away some carries. Do we expect that to be a tandem situation, i.e. Arkansas with Williams and Collins, or does Butch Jones want to rely on one guy primarily?
I mean, I think Jalen Hurd's the guy. As talented as Alvin Kamara is, as excited as they are about him, I think they want Jalen Hurd to be the guy. I don't know what that split's going to look like. I don't know if it's 60-40, 70-30, 80-20. Hard to say. That'll be one of the big storylines that I'll be watching in camp, is to see how much they rotate those guys in and out, try to get a feel for that rotation a little bit better. But Jalen Hurd is an incredibly talented back. He's up to about 242 pounds this offseason. I mean, that's Derrick Henry size at this point. He ran a 4.4 coming out of high school. I think he's kept a lot of that speed. He's powerful. He's a team leader, catches passes out of the backfield, as you mentioned. Really good in pass protection as well. That gets overlooked. And with size like that, you certainly have the ability to be. So he does everything that you really need in an every down back. I think he's the guy that Tennessee's going to ride. Kamara, he's explosive. He made some huge plays in spring when he got on campus. Was really impressed. Saw him shake some veteran Tennessee defenders, just making them look silly. So I think he's going to have his place. I think he's going to have his spots. I think Hurd's going to kind of be the battering ram to an extent, and they're going to bring Alvin in and let him kind of pick his spots, make some big plays. Not a lot of depth behind those two. That's going to be a concern if either one of them go down. But definitely a lot of potential at running back Tennessee, two really talented guys. We'll see, how it shakes out with Tennessee's offensive line and if they're going to have enough room to run or not.
Well, Daniel, there does appear to be depth at wide receiver. Pig Howard, Von Pearson, Josh Malone, Marquez North, who got banged up a little bit last year, took a step back in regards to his production, but should be back ready to go. So looking at this wide receiver core, the one thing that I see in running through the numbers from last year is nobody really got downfield. Obviously, Dobbs was not in place until like game 8. There were issues along the offensive line that you point out. So that can be a byproduct of a number of things. But I would expect, based on the hype and based on the recruiting rankings, that they expect more big plays out of this wide receiver core.
Yeah, I think so. And you could identify several reasons last year why the receiving game didn't quite click like it should have. You can look at quarterback changes. You can look at the offensive line. You can look at injuries at the wide receiver position, which they had several. And frankly, I think one thing Joshua Dobbs needs to get better at is the deep ball. That's not one of his specialties, throwing down the boundary. Not something he does incredibly well, at least last year. We'll see if he makes strides in this area. And those receivers, I see so much talent when I look at that receiver position. You see a lot of 4-star guys, 5-star guys. You mentioned several guys who are highly ranked recruits. Marquez North. They're bringing in Preston Williams, who was a 5-star last year. Josh Malone, former 5-star. Several other 4-star type guys. So there's a ton of talent there. They look like an NFL receiver group sometimes. You got size, you got speed. They can do a little bit of everything, but they just don't always perform like they look like they should, frankly. And that's something Tennessee has to be better at. They have to get more separation. They've got to get guys healthy. They're missing a lot of guys in the spring. There's a legal issue with Von Pearson, one of the receivers that you mentioned. His status is in limbo right now, dating back to an alleged sexual assault back in the spring where he was named a suspect. That's just kind of a fluid situation. No answers there. So they don't know if they'll have him. They should have Marquez North, should have Pig Howard, should have Josh Malone, should have Josh Smith, Jason Kroom, Preston Williams, the talented 5-star I mentioned. He's coming off an ACL surgery his senior year in high school, but he'll probably get in the mix sometime. So a lot of talent, a lot of impressive-looking guys, but it's a unit that really needs to step up and stretch the field a little bit more in 2015.
Should be a really good matchup with Georgia as the Bulldogs field probably one of the top 5 defensive secondaries in college football, and that typically is the litmus test in the East, and especially considering if the media knows anything about the top 2 dogs in the Eastern Division this year, picking Georgia to win again. Tennessee probably in that 2 spot. Missouri gets forgotten again. Let's look at the line play, Daniel, because I'm going to put both lines together in regards to a stat that was prevalent last year at this point in talking about Tennessee's line play, both offensively and defensively, and returning 0 starters, the only team in Power 5 college football to return 0 starters from the previous season. Now you have youthful experience to lean on. I understand that the offensive line's still a bit of a question mark, though.
Yeah, change was good for the defensive line in 2014. A bunch of new starters there, but they had guys like Derek Barnett step up. They bring Curt Maggitt back, who had missed over a year with a serious knee issue. He stepped back in 2014, played linebacker and defensive end. Owen Williams, Danny O'Brien, a couple guys stepped up on the defensive line. Jordan Williams, who's moved on, graduated senior. But change was a good thing for the defensive line last year. That group was much more aggressive, more disruptive, got after the quarterbacks, made tackles for loss. That was really a big upgrade for the 2014 team. Offensive line, not so much. They lost an incredibly talented group from 2013. All 5 of those guys from the 2013 line are either still in the NFL or at least got an NFL opportunity in some way. That looks like an NFL line, and it is proven to be so. I think at least 3 of those guys are starting in the NFL right now, or at least getting playing time. And that's a huge rebuilding project. And that was really one of the stories of 2014. I think Tennessee could have gone a lot further if not for that group. It held them back. They didn't have a lot of talent there. They didn't have a lot of depth there. Former coach Derek Dooley actually went an entire year, I believe it was 2011 or 12, where he was a line in a signing class. And that will just cripple that position for several years to come. So they've kind of been paying for his sins a little bit, starting to rebuild it. Got some more experience coming back. Jashawn Robertson, a guy who started as a true freshman last year, really, really talented. I actually had him as a second-team All-SEC selection. He's overlooked because of all the other lack of talent on Tennessee's line, but he's a really good player. Several returning veterans, 5-star Drew Richmond brought in from the Memphis area. So the talent's getting better there. Still a huge question mark on the offensive line. And for me, when I look at this Tennessee team, I see a lot of potential, but I think to some extent it's only going to be able to go as far as the offensive line takes it. I think that's their biggest limitation. I will say, though, having Joshua Dobbs, having that athletic presence back there helped mask some of those deficiencies late last year. And I think as long as he stays healthy, that'll happen again in 2015.
Yes, we transition from offense to defense. You mentioned the production from Maggitt and from Barnett, which in terms of getting into the opponent's backfield was off the charts. Both guys just racked up tons of sacks and tackles for loss. This Jalen Reeves-Maben, he's understated. Not a whole lot of publicity from him for a guy that led the team in tackles with 101. Cam Sutton's back with Brian Randolph at safety. They're two of the best in the SEC at their respective positions. So the defense, when I look at the personnel across the board, I know you've got some concerns up front, but it appears as though this defense could be extremely good this fall.
It really could. It could be sneaky good. I don't know where it's going to rank in the SEC. I'm not sure if it's up there with an Alabama or an Ole Miss necessarily, but it could be kind of a sneaky pick to be one of the better defenses in the SEC. John Jancic, defensive coordinator, has done a fantastic job. He was kind of a little bit of a maligned hire by Butch Jones. He struggled when he was at Georgia a few years ago, but he's put it together at Tennessee. They've recruited well on that side of the ball. They've upped the speed level, which was a huge issue when Butch Jones first got to Tennessee. I think the biggest question for defense is kind of that inside linebacker. That's where they had A.J. Johnson the last few years. He had some legal issues as well, so his career got cut a little short. So they kind of got a chance to test some other guys, and frankly, nothing went, quite as well as they would have hoped. They didn't find his replacement. That could be a true freshman, someone like Darren Kirkland Jr., could be Kenny Bynum, a returning redshirt junior, a guy who's kind of steady, knows the defense. But that's a big question, that inside linebacker spot. The chance to have a really athletic secondary. You mentioned some of those guys. Cam Sutton, definitely overlooked, one of the best corners in the SEC. And Reeves-Maben, like you mentioned, also 100-plus tackles last year. And without A.J. Johnson kind of stealing a lot of those tackles, I think he could pile up 120, 130-plus this year. He's really active and really athletic.
Few guys for you that were highly recruited. Khalil McKenzie, you got Kyle Phillips, you got Shai Tuttle. Are those guys going to be needed to be playmakers, do you think, on this defense?
Yeah, I think a defensive tackle, you mentioned Khalil McKenzie. He was ranked as high as the #1 overall recruit in the nation by Scout.com last year. He is a custom-built machine at defensive tackle. NFL bloodlines. He's about 6'3", 6'4", 320, 330. Right now, at an NFL combine level. I mean, he's just putting up huge numbers, and he just got on campus a couple months ago. I think he's going to step in and play day one. I don't know if that's in a starting role, a rotational role, but I think he's going to help Tennessee. They've got some veterans at defensive tackle, but no one that really blows you away. So I think he has a chance to be a player, a factor there. Shai Tuttle, someone you didn't mention, was a high 4-star defensive tackle. He did enroll in the spring, showed some really good things there. And Tennessee's got some young players at defensive tackle that could make an impact. Kyle Phillips, 5-star defensive end. He missed spring with an injury issue. They have a little more depth at defensive end, so he may be more of a situational kind of project player overall. So, yeah, I think you'll see some freshmen playing early, playing often, especially at that defensive tackle spot.
Daniel Lewis joining us from Rocky Top Insider. Daniel, one last thing here. We've talked about the personnel. Now let's talk about the expectations and what reality is. You mentioned the schedule off the top and how brutal it is. And I think that the SEC East, because of the prowess of the West, gets shortchanged. It's still an extremely competitive division. There could be an argument that it's the second best division in college football. I may rate it third or fourth, but it's very close to second. Okay, then you draw, obviously, the cross-division rivalry with Alabama, tack on Arkansas. That's an up-and-comer. It's a very difficult schedule with Oklahoma as the marquee non-conference matchup. Going from 5 to 7 wins, that's an improvement. That's really good. You get back into postseason play and turn in an impressive bowl performance. Going from 7 to 9 wins, though, or 10 wins in the SEC, you've already covered the games that you're supposed to win, the Kentuckys and the Vandy's in those games. South Carolina maybe is in that grouping now. To take that next step in the SEC, though, those wins are going to start to come or have to come against top 15 teams. So that's a big jump when you talk from 7 to 9 or 10 wins in the SEC.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's why I'm not willing to go there yet. I think they certainly could get there. There are so many toss-up games on this schedule for Tennessee. It's unbelievable. Outside of some of the ones you mentioned, the Vanderbilts, the Kentuckys, maybe South Carolina, 3 of the non-conference games, those are ones that Tennessee probably should get at this point if they're going to meet any of the expectations that people have for them. But, man, I mean, you look at Georgia, you look at Arkansas, you look at Oklahoma, you maybe look at Alabama, though I think Tennessee will be a decent underdog in that one. And you're just going to have a lot of games that are going to be toss-ups. And I think, Tennessee could be anywhere from 6 or 7 wins if things don't go quite like they wanted. They have a couple injuries, all the way maybe to that 9 or 10 plateau if things go really well. I'm kind of splitting the difference right now. My thought right now before I see this team in camp is about an 8-4 campaign is about where they should be. I think those are reasonable expectations. I think they should be in contention in the East. I don't know that they'll win it. I did not pick them to win it. I have Georgia winning it. But I think they need to be in that conversation. I think they need to be kind of in the hunt within a game or two at the end of the season. So we'll see. I mean, there are a lot of high expectations for this team, which Jones has had the task of kind of managing those a little bit without trying to dampen the party too much. So we'll see. I've got them at about 8 wins. Certainly can do more, but still some depth issues. And if a quarterback goes down or a Jalen Hurd goes down or something like that, it could go to 6 or 7 pretty easily as well. So it's going to be a really intriguing season. And as you said off the top, Tennessee fans are about as excited as they've been in a decade or more.
And fortunately for you, your main competition in the East, or what's expected to be, Georgia has to play Alabama. So they draw just about as difficult a schedule as you do in the other division because they've got Auburn and Alabama, and it doesn't necessarily always shake out like that. And that's one of my criticisms of conference scheduling across the board, or the cross-division rivalries. I know that they keep the tradition intact, but sometimes really make for a uneven playing ground in determining a champion in the conference. Daniel Lewis from Rocky Top Insider joining us to break down the Vols. Daniel, we couldn't have done it without you. Thanks so much for the breakdown here.
Absolutely, Mark. Thanks for having me on anytime.